Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Read Ethos, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular video is called No Justification Needed, written by daeomec. Humanity was too new to the galactic scene for Captain Gomez to get a proper drink, so she simply sipped water and watched her new unit. The various members, like her, were the rising stars of their species, sent to the Galactic Federation to represent their people's best.
"We're lucky that the raid was another false alarm," said Sixth,
a pseudo-reptilian Lek. Despite the scales, the Lek were warm-blooded and the closest to human physiologically. He flicked his tail, amusement.
Un dropped his gun during dismount. If they were actual pirates, we'd be godders.
"Not my fault. I'm not used to the new armor,"
Un bristled, their spines undulating. It was pretty effective at making them look more threatening, but their color remained a playful blue.
Excuses. I hope the Dugua's best don't actually fight like Un.
Captain Gomez smiled as the teasing continued. No matter the species, it seemed like post-mission rituals were similar.
"What did the rookie think of her new mission?"
Lex looked at her and flicked his tail again.
"Enjoy the action?"
She snorted.
"You know, I'm not really a rookie."
Un jumped at the chance to divert the team's attention.
"You're still a rookie to us."
"All right then," Lex tapped a claw. "Does the not a rookie have any war stories to share?"
Gomez kept a smile as she sipped her water, but it was far less genuine than before. The Federation was more like the Earth's old United Nations, less of a galactic government and more of a platform for nations to posture, which meant that Lex and all the other squad members represented their own governments first, and they were all eager to pry information about our galaxy's newest spacefaring species, which was fair because she planned on doing the same to them.
"I'll share if you share."
Pepip, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up.
"Sounds fair. I'll go first."
He inflated his vocal sacs.
"It happened during a wartime against the Tiri. During the ground landings, my power armor was overclocked, and when I tried to kick a civilian child aside to get to the soldier, I accidentally popped it like a balloon."
The other two members of the team roared with laughter, and after a second, Pipip joined them. Captain Gomez kept smiling, uncertain if she'd heard that right.
"You tell that same story every time,"
Un accused, still laughing.
"Yeah, it's worth it,"
said Pipip, inflating his sacs again. Un inflated their spines.
"It definitely is. It's my turn, but I have something better."
They turned an excited green.
"I invaded the Nikolai O-world and found the jackpot of all jackpots."
They leaned forward, quivering.
"An egg cache."
Everyone gasped, or did the species equivalent, Gomez included. She got the sinking feeling that her reason was different from the rest.
"Eggs covered every wall and ceiling of the tunnels,"
Un continued.
"We were having trouble smashing them all. Guns weren't enough. So we started playing toonball and hopping from egg to egg, smashing them as fast as we could."
They stood up and pointed at themselves.
"And this one right here won the unofficial award for most eggs smashed."
Everyone cheered, clapping Un on the back and tapping the table. Gomez was finding it difficult to swallow. The stories continued.
"Favorite torture method?" asked Un. "It's fire for me."
"Knives," said Pipip. Gomez did her best to follow who said what. This was all valuable information. They were giving her a first-hand look at how their species conducted war, assuming that this wasn't some sort of hazing ritual. Unfortunately, the more they talked, the more horrified she became, and the more true their stories seemed. Lex scraped his nails together, and everyone turned to him.
"I prefer not to hurt them at all. Why resort to physical pain of the victim when you can chop the fingers of their partners or children? It's far more effective."
"Cutting limbs works better,"
Un disagreed. Lex flicked his eyes in dismissal.
"Limbs eventually, but it's sloppy if you need to get so far." "It's not about sloppiness, it's about fun."
"It's fun sometimes," argued Lex,
"but I find it more tedious. It's just a necessity, not something to take too much joy in."
"We've gotten too far from the point,"
Pip deflated his sacks. We were supposed to ask Gomez, remember? They all turned to her, and under their attention, she was able to bring her expression into something disinterested. Her words, though, came out emotionless and stiff. It was better than angry or horrified, but the tone wasn't quite what she was going for. We don't do that. Why not? Un asked. Torture doesn't work, she replied on reflex, repeating the phrase that had been drilled into her with every training. Everyone did their equivalent of laughing again, save Lex. He was the only one who looked at her carefully, the first to realize from the beginning that she was serious. Just as Gomez found his body language the easiest to read, the reverse was also true. You don't mean that, do you? Pippa squinted his 4 eyes at her. Oh, you do! Un bristled, their shade of violet dangerously close to disdain. If it doesn't work, it just means that you haven't tortured hard enough. Gomez said nothing, simply smiling and sipping her water again. You have done it, Lex said finally. We've read the histories of your people. The violence that humans have done to your own people is just as brutal. What do you mean that you don't do that? She was too stiff, but Gomez was a soldier first and a diplomat second. Still, she continued smiling. We don't do that anymore, she set her glass down. Not anymore, she repeated. Never. Un's purple was now outwardly dismissive. Gomez hesitated just for a moment. There are rules against it. If someone does do it, they're punished. Pepper did his whistling laugh. Sure. Though Un and Pepper were clearly amused and mocking, Lex seemed almost sympathetic. Or maybe she was just putting too much of the human body language on him. It was easy to do that with a fellow bipedal. We'll see if that holds after your first war, he said, leaning back. It's cute that you humans have held onto these silly trappings. All it would take is one act of violence, one act of what your people call cruelty, and your little dirt house will come crumbling down. You're no different from any other predator species. As much as you pretend to be herbivores, you'll show your teeth. We'll see, she repeated, but she didn't sound as sure. Gomez paced in her room. She'd known about their cruelty, just as how Lex had learned her species' history, so had she for theirs. It was one thing to read about it, and another thing to sit across people who talked about killing children in one breath and teased her in the next. Her steady head was the reason she'd been chosen as a representative. She didn't feel very steady now. Gomez flexed her hands, resorting to a technique her mother taught her decades ago, a technique she hadn't used in nearly as long. Gomez counted every finger, every segment, every nail, every knuckle. When she ran out of things to count on the back, she flipped over to their palms and started again. Gomez ran through the exercise twice. Then she tapped the console and a commanding officer appeared in the hologram. Report, said General Anuga. Normally Gomez wouldn't be skipping the chain of command, but the general had requested it personally. It's what we feared, Gomez began, unprofessionally, and then took comfort in formality. Back straight, arms behind her back, she described the entire conversation as clinical terms as she could manage. The general's expression revealed nothing. I see, she swallowed. We will likely see live combat in the next week. General Hugo was silent. I may witness his behavior firsthand, ma'am. You will witness it, she said sharply, and nothing else. You will not start a war, Captain Gomez. I understand, ma'am, said Gomez. Her heart pounded, but she stayed stiff, chin up. The general softened marginally. This is a difficult assignment, but you were chosen for a reason. I know you will accomplish your task and represent humanity well. A pause, and for a moment, it seemed like she'd say something else. The moment passed. You are dismissed. Even after the hologram flickered off, Gomez stared at the wall for long enough that the cracks were imprinted in her memory when she closed her eyes to sleep. Gomez was right in her predictions. They were deployed as a peacekeeping force to a planet that bigger civilizations used as a stage for proxy wars. Everyone but the native inhabitants found this to be acceptable, and it was to pacify those very native inhabitants that their crack team was sent. Her power armor hummed around her, familiar in its embrace. The model she had was advanced enough to be impressive, but old enough
that there was no worth in the other species trying to glean its secrets. That is, old enough in all aspects but one.
Captain Gomez, all systems go,
murmured the AI Archie, it was called, for some reason that no one remembered anymore. This Archie was the newest one, capable of defending itself from all threats, physical and cyber. She sent a mental affirmative. Her heart pounded like it was her first live mission. Archie displayed that statistic in the corner of her HUD and sent a gentle query. Gomez ignored it.
"We're about to hit the ground, team,"
Lex said through the channels. His own power armor was made of interlocking plates and painted in red.
"Get ready."
The landing was flawless. The pacification of the armed rebels was just as easy. The natives had nothing more than kinetic guns 5 generations old. The Federation had sent 4 of them because they only needed 4 for such a backwater. Gomez could stomach this. She pitied the poor bastards, but they were shooting at her, even if the guns had no chance of damaging her. Archie confirmed it with a pop-up of armor integrity, 99.98%.
"The rebels are done," cheered Pip-Pip. "Time for the civilians."
"Yes," the Lex gestured at an armored tail.
"Make an example."
"With pleasure." Oon's armor displayed the colors they felt, an intense, overjoyed magenta. Gomez's pulse rate shot up. Her breath came in short spurts. Adrenaline coursed through her, a flood that actual combat hadn't brought out. The natives, the Kiri, were pseudo-mammalian and tripedal. Their eyes were large and doe-like, and their fur in soft pastel colors. The tallest members of their species barely reached her shoulder. Their children didn't reach her knee. If they had an entirely unrecognizable body plan, if they'd been insectoid or amphibian or simply ugly, it was possible that Gomez would have remembered General Ahuga's words and listened. Gomez would have liked to think otherwise, but she couldn't discount it. It was possible that she could have seen Pip-Pip shoot the child and not have acted. She moved before the body hit the ground, before conscious thought. She moved, and then she froze. The exoskeleton kept her in a rictus, gun half drawn, held in position that wasn't quite a threat.
"Section 23-D prevents violence against allied troops,"
Archie said to her without sympathy. "Crimes against sentience overrides all sections," she snarled back.
"High Command disabled override CAS."
"No," she said. "No." Archie didn't respond.
"Gomez, are you going to participate?"
Lex asked over the main channels. She was given the ability to move again, though her gun remained disabled. The corner of the screen flashed a warning, and Gomez knew that if she tried again, she would have the same result. "No," she said, this time to everyone. He shrugged, a gesture that had the same meaning, and turned back to the city. Gomez watched. They camped around a glowing orange cube, the technological solution for a campfire. Gomez couldn't stare into the ever-changing flames. Instead, she looked at her hands. She timed the dull throb of the artificial heat by the orange flash across her fingers. Gomez hadn't spoken to her team, even as they laughed and joked about the events. Yet, of all the atrocities she'd seen, it was only the first one that replayed in her memory. The gun, the child, the fall. Lex broke away from the other two and took his seat next to her. She glanced at him and considered. She could probably do it. Step on the tail, a full-weight jab against the fragile throat bones, and when he fell, a kick to the head. Pick up his gun, shoot the other two. Simple. Simple if the power armor didn't stop her. Gomez couldn't take it off. She tried.
"It wouldn't help them," said Lex finally. "What you wanted to do, it wouldn't help them."
What did I want to do? She impressed herself. There wasn't a hint of malice in her question.
"You thought to spare the civilians from war. You would only prolong their suffering. It's bad form to leave an enemy bitter with a small injury. With quick destruction, we prevent future conflict. You must understand, Gomez. I don't enjoy it. None of my people do. But it is better this way."
The gun, the child, the fall. He continued.
"Your feelings are admirable, even if Pip-Pip and Oon don't understand. Their people have never tried for passive, artificial peace." His second eyelids blinked. "Mine did. When we reached the stars, we were peaceful, more or less. We tried to have rules for war." His tail slapped against the ground. "Yes, I know the sentiment is moronic now,
but we did try. Her hands, armored, clean, orange with light. The Logue attacked our homestar. You've never heard of the Logue because we killed them all. But that came later. Lex waited for her to comment. She said nothing. They attacked an outer moon. We retaliated proportionally. A moon for a moon. We offered them terms. We asked to negotiate. And the Logue pretended to listen. Then they glassed our cradle, and they all died for it. She could pretend otherwise, but she was complicit in these crimes. He waited again. She didn't move, and she didn't speak. You're a coward, said Lex, and you are a fool. Gomez looked up. What do you mean? She felt like she was speaking from a great distance, like the voice wasn't her own, but of an AI who mimicked her. You didn't raise a finger to stop us despite what you so clearly felt. I hope your people never have someone so unambitious and weak-willed as their leader. He tilted his head, especially someone whose ideals would get them all killed. Gomez didn't respond. Lex scraped his claws together, a clacking noise that caused Pip-Up and Un to stop in their conversation. Even now you don't react, he said with wonder. Is this impeccable self-control, or is equally impeccable cowardice? She smiled. Commander Lex, it's unprofessional to commit violent acts against fellow soldiers, especially a superior officer during deployment. His eyes flickered with amusement. This is true. Us humans are new to the Federation, said Gomez. We came here to learn. Thank you for sharing that story about your people. Perhaps you're right about war. Pup and Un pulled them back into their conversation, and Gomez kept that smile throughout the night. I want to quit, she said. The general didn't blink. No. Gomez spent 3 years with the Federation. She spent 3 years bearing witness to thousands of crimes committed by the dozens of species powerful enough to gain a seat. The best she could hope for were others like Lex, people who found it distasteful but necessary. But the sentiment didn't make the crimes less real. She mastered the art of declining mass murder with the same rueful ease of a teetotaler at a bar. Gomez knew the words to say to each species who found her refusal baffling. The phrases to convince them that it wasn't weakness, but caution that motivated her. She made friends, connections, and sent intelligence dutifully and on schedule. When Gomez rejoined the proper military of humanity, one of her tasks was to keep in touch with the sapiens she'd served with. They, like her, were rising stars, and it'd be valuable to have personal contacts with individuals who'd so clearly climbed the ranks. Sometimes Gomez was so filled with loathing that she couldn't write a word, the memories of their actions playing on loop in her mind, but those days were rare. She hated herself because there was conversation she looked forward to. She hated herself because it was so easy to forget the atrocities they committed when she was so far from the battlefield. She hated herself because even then, when she trudged over bodies by their side, it had been easy to forget. She hated herself because she feared, most of all, that they were right. The day that humanity lost the world was the day that Lex sent her a message unprompted. Your people have learned, like I said. And then a second one. It is better this way. Gomez glanced at her hands. Then she picked up the screen reader and crushed it under her feet. No, she thought and smiled. She wouldn't watch anymore. Realistically, Gomez is the perfect candidate for mid-level leadership. She followed orders, did her job well, commanded respect from troops under her, and had no sense of arrogance or creativity. Gomez was good enough, not noticeable in any extreme. So was to everyone's surprise but hers when she began climbing past the ranks suited for her. If anyone dared broach the subject with her, Gomez would give a modest smile and mention hard work and perseverance. She had spent 3 years in the Federation. The workplace politics in the human military were almost laughable in comparison. It took decades, but in the end, she was given her admiralty. And Gomez accepted it with the same modest smile. Now her work could actually begin. The casus belli didn't actually matter. Someone attacked, someone died, and they were at war. The Lek were ready, but so were they. As Gomez addressed the troops, her mind was clear, save for one miscellaneous bit of irony. In another fleet, another planet, Lex was doing the same with his own soldiers. What will they do if they win? She said softly. They will kill our children, torture our family, tear us from limb to limb with a smile.
They will use chemical weapons, antimatter bombs, and cruelty that we can't even imagine. She could see their discontent, their anger, and their fear. This wasn't humanity's first war in the stars, and it wouldn't be their last. It wasn't even her first war as Admiral, and despite the 3 decades she served at the top, Gomez likely had another decade left commanding the sum of humanity's forces. These facts wasn't new, and it had been confirmed over and over again by her and by millions of others. Admiral Gomez continued, "But what will we give them when we win?" "Justice!" roared her troops as one. "Will we kill their children?" "No!" She shouted with them. "Will we poison their water, radiate their lands?" "No!" "No, we won't. We will destroy their industry, decimate their army, but we won't touch a hair on their civilians." "Why?" Gomez smiled. "Because we're humans, and we're fecking better than that." The war was short. For all that Lex had said and done, he had spoken one truth. Protracted conflict benefited no one. Gomez would give his people that. Humanity invaded the Lex homeworld, long recovered since its glassing at the hands of the dead species, a world still full of life despite the war. Eventually, Admiral Gomez landed on the same planet, and General Leader Lex was brought before her in white handcuffs. Even then, those restraints were only because he tried to kill his guards after being captured. They were both old now, Gomez realized. It was one thing to know, and it was another to understand. Lex's scales were dull, and his tail had age spirals creeping up from the edge. She knew what differences he would see. Her hair was all gray, and crow lines crowded her eyes. The hands she so often stared at were covered in a map of wrinkles. "So," she said. "So," his eyes flickered. "I'm brought before the esteemed Admiral. What a pleasure this is." Gomez watched him, and she wondered if she could still consider her a fool. There was a tinge of vindictive pleasure with him standing before her in defeat, but it died milliseconds after its birth. "Do you remember what you told me?" He smacked his tail against the floor, and the guards flinched. "Prove me right." "No," she said. Lex had, without knowing it, shaped her life more than almost any other sapient, through spite mostly, but the honor was still his. "Do you know what mercy is?" Lex tilted his head. His posture was all contempt, and he didn't dignify her with a response. "It's a word for compassion," she explained. "Staying your hand instead of giving the final blow, showing kindness to someone suffering, or to an enemy." "Ah!" He rubbed his claws, an echo of a gesture he made all those decades ago in front of an artificial campfire. "We too have a word for that. Cowardice." "Mercy," continued Gomez, "cannot be given from a position of weakness, only from strength. Mercy comes from knowing that we can destroy you and choosing not to." Lex stopped. "No," he said, "that's foolishness. You should kill every child, cripple every warrior, and gas our planet. Anything less is courting disaster." He said this straight to the face of the soldier who held his planet hostage, even while knowing he might do his species. Gomez couldn't help but feel the strange sort of respect in turn, even while knowing that he'd kill her and her children without second thought if the positions were turned. "You weren't exactly wrong, you know." The Admiral spoke softer, meeting the eyes of someone who had never quite been her friend. He'd committed atrocity after atrocity, and she'd served beside him on dozens of those battlefields. Humanity isn't better than that. Every single day is a struggle against our nature. Sometimes we lose. "My people lost," he snarled, "and this mockery." "I thought about your words constantly," said Gomez conversationally. "I lived in fear that we'd go past the point of no return, and maybe that made me a coward. But I wanted to give mercy. But for that, we needed strength. That's what I built. That's what we built. Humanity crushed your fleet in less than a month, all without killing a civilian. And we're going to leave your planets untouched. Hell, we'll even send you some aid if you need it." Lex didn't speak. He was still with anger, with fear, or perhaps with some other emotion. She didn't know. "Humanity is so fecking strong that you wouldn't be able to hurt us if you tried. And you tried." Gomez flexed a hand. "I can't forgive you." She couldn't forgive herself, not yet. "But perhaps others will. My children or grandchildren will welcome you, and our peoples will be at peace." "Why?" he finally asked. She smiled. "Because we can.
Because we should. Mercy needs no justification.
End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Casper Arnholtz, Drexzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.